Throughout the games of the Souls series, many core themes and concepts have returned in each game, each time with a slightly different approach or point of view. Some of these concepts include weapons and gear, the basis of any good role-playing game. The games of the Souls series are special, in the sense that every weapon, every consumable, every armor, and every item carries its own story, laid out in its description, which is convenient given the very cryptic and vague nature of the narrative style. As a result, it's not uncommon to see weapons make a return in each game, like the famous Moonlight Greatsword, practically a mascot of the company at this point. Being a Japanese company, it's no surprise that From Software would introduce elements of its own culture and history into the game's arsenal, in this case, the katanas. One of these katanas always stood out among the others. A strange blade, with an equally strange gimmick. A cursed weapon that hurts its own user just as much as it hurts its enemies. A symbol of murderous madness, a tragedy written in blood. In Demon Souls, there isn't one, but two blades who have the property to hurt their own user, both for very different reasons, Hiltless and Magic Sword Makoto. For the former, the reason is both self-explanatory and kind of silly. The sword is said to be a fine piece of work with an intricate design forged by a famous swordsmith in a distant land. The reason you hurt yourself when swinging that otherwise impressive sword is because the swordsmith who made it apparently forgot to give it a hilt, meaning you have to hold it by the blade and hurt your hands in the process. The more interesting of the two, however, is the latter, Magic Sword Makoto, which already laid out the basic concepts of what the cursed blade will become in later games. According to its description, this product of folklore is actually cursed, and is named after a warrior named Makoto the Giant. It isn't precise if Makoto was just an unusually tall human or an actual giant, but either way, he must have been a violent and terrific warrior, made evident by the many teeth carved on the blade. Another aspect that was introduced with this weapon is, of course, that it hurt its own user when swinging it, most likely due to the curse afflicting the blade. For summary, Demon Souls introduced the idea of a cursed katana that promise immense power for the price of your own life essence, a concept that will return with each new iteration of the blade. The Dark Souls iteration of the blade has the advantage of appearing in 3 games, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, meaning it gets 3 different descriptions, allowing us to get a better grasp on what the blade actually is. In Dark Souls 1, it is described as a curved sword born from the soul of Quelag, daughter of the Witch of Izalith, who was transformed into a chaos demon. This blade inherits only the chaotic nature of Quelag, and has a unique speckle design. Blade wielder erodes along with opponents. Its description in Dark Souls 2 says, a katana of unknown origin. Damage to foes also damages its owner. The peculiar pattern upon the blade suggests the sinister nature of this cursed blade. It is an alluring vortex, and a lonely soul. And finally, in Dark Souls 3 it is said to be a cursed sword of unknown origin bearing uncanny streaks on its blade. Attacks also damage its wielder. The sword is not unlike a thing misshapen, granted life, but never welcome in this world. In other words, chaos itself. What we can get from all of this is that, essentially, the Chaos Blade is one of the consequences of a failed experiments, an unplanned result, as chaotic as the demons born from it. The flame of chaos of Dark Souls was born from the Witch of Izalith's attempt to replace the first flame. When it started to fade over time, the experiment failed however and transformed the witch, her daughters of chaos, and all inhabitants of Izalith into mutated demons. This experiment is what provoked the birth of the demon race. It is interesting to note that all 3 descriptions seems to hint that the blade is chaotic, yes, but also apparently alive. Dark Souls 1 state that it's a curved sword born as from the soul of Quelag, not built, not forged, not fabricated, born. As in born like a living being. Dark Souls 2 indirectly reiterate this by describing the blade as an alluring vortex with a lonely soul. This sort of imply that this thing apparently has a soul, or perhaps that a remnant of Quelag's soul can be felt from it. But Dark Souls 3 outright confirms it, stating that the sword is, quote, not unlike a thing misshapen, granted life, end quote. All 3 games basically hinted that the Chaos Blade isn't just a weapon, it has a soul, it's alive in a way, and since its life came from the Chaos Flame, it's safe to assume that the Chaos Blade is a demon of some kind. The demons of Dark Souls aren't exactly evil, but they are characterized by their deeply chaotic and illogical nature. These are life forms that follow no logic, no cohesive element link them together. They can look like mutated animals like the Taurus demon, humanoids with a goat skull for a head like the Capra demon, and constantly burning hellspawns like the demon Firesage. We also know for a fact that the life that gave birth to demons can also create life from items, as confirmed by the orange charred ring giving birth to the centipede demon. So, if demons aren't evil but simply illogical and chaotic, if life granted by the Chaos Flame can take any and all form, to the point of even giving life to mere objects, and that all of these life forms regardless of origins are confirmed to be demons, then is it so much of a stretch to consider the Chaos Blade to be a demon as well? After all 3 of its descriptions at the very least heavily imply that it is alive and even has a soul, and one could interpret its passive ability to harm its user as the blade simply feeding on life energy like a parasite. Essentially trading some of your life essence for the power of an actual demon. Or you could also interpret this as the blade making a pact with its user, a deal. I give you my power, but in exchange I take a bit of your life energy. The Chaos Blade didn't return in any following game, but another weapon that is very similar to it in appearance and concept can be found in Bloodborne. The Chikage is one of the many trick weapons of Bloodborne, meaning it is able to change form. While its predecessors seem to drain their user's life in a purely magic way with each swing of the blade, the way the Chikage does it is not only done slowly over time, but also seems more visceral, more physical. It still uses the occult, mind you, but seem to require the user's very blood to function. Its descriptions state the following. Foreign-made weapon wielded by the royal guards who protect Annalise, Queen of the Vile Bloods at Canehurst Castle. When the intricate, rippled engraving that spans the Chikagea's blade is imbrued with blood, the sword sings in scarlet hues. However, the rite eats away at the wielder's very essence. This clearly indicates that the rite, or ritual in this case, require blood to be activated, which isn't much of a surprise. Blood isn't just a mere bodily fluid in Bloodborne, it is a legitimate source of power used in many different ways by many different factions and characters in the game. Of all these factions and characters, the Vile Bloods of Castle Canehurst are probably their most prominent users, using it to craft their weapons, imbuing their magic with its essence and offering it to their queen, Annalise. The Vile Bloods are the royal guards of Queen Annalise, an elite branch of hunters, using blood-tinged weapons to hunt down other hunters and collect blood dregs from them, which they then offer to their queen in the hope that she one day bear an heir, the child of blood. With that context in mind, we can assume that the Vile Bloods are to Annalise what paladins are to a church, meaning that the Chikage hurting them isn't just pointless pain to gain power, but can be interpreted as pledging to an oath towards Annalise, or perhaps it's a form of prayer for their beliefs. Whatever it is, it can most certainly serve as a warning for even the Vile Bloods, that using this power too much only lead to self-destruction. A warning to use and respect this power but also to fear it. That is perhaps the one thing they have in common with their mortal enemies of the Healing Church. After all, we are born of the blood, made men by the blood and undone by the blood, as the adage goes.
覚悟が終わりならば改められよ。なぜ皆死を厭わぬのですか。あなたは一体。その右目、流因の呪いを受けているのですね。
不思議り、確かにもらい受けた。
Of all games of the Soulsborne series, Sekiro is perhaps the most narratively focused of them all. As a result, any system of gear and equipment typically found in most RPGs is absent from this game, instead replaced by a simplified leveling system with a skill tree and special skills to unlock as you progress through the story. The Mortal Blade is described in-game as an Odachi capable of slaying the undying. Its crimson blade will take the life of any who dares draw it. The main theme of the game is without a doubt the concept of immortality, so the mere presence of this weapon, capable of killing even immortal beings, sound like an ironic reminder that trying to escape death is inherently futile. As far as gameplay goes, the Mortal Blade isn't exactly a weapon in the traditional sense of the term, as it is only useful for the combat art system of the game. Unlocking this weapon only allows the player to equip two of those combat arts, Mortal Draw and Empowered Mortal Draw. It certainly continues the cursed katana theme that was going on since Demon's Souls, because while using any version of the Mortal Draw doesn't exactly hurt the player in gameplay, it does kill whoever tries to draw the weapon in the lore. In fact, that is exactly what happened to Wolf himself when he tries to use it for the first time. But Wolf is immortal in this game thanks to Kuro's blood, allowing him to draw the blade unharmed, as long as he does it respectfully, without hesitation. Hesitation being another core theme of the game's narrative. Furthermore, the weapon is used in-game for special and unique shinobi executions, used to kill some bosses considered immortal, like the Guardian Ape, the True Monk, the Sword Saint version of Ishin and the Divine Dragon, the latter being more or less the embodiment of immortality in this game.
Dearest Mikola, you must abide alone a while. Welcome, honored guest, to the birthplace of our dynasty.
Elden Ring's cosmology is filled with entities known as outer gods. Every outer god has its own beliefs, personality and goals, but all share a common ambition, taking over the lands between, using their respective followers as a mean to that end. Of all the outer gods, one stand out as arguably the most cruel and reviled. The Formless Mother. Like most outer gods, very little is known about the Formless Mother. All we know is that she is also called the Mother of Truth, that she is known to crave wounds, and to bestow her power from accursed blood. At some point, she encountered an omen, deep in the underground prison under the capital city of Leyndell. That omen was named Mog, twin brother of Morgott and son of Queen Marika and First Elden Lord Godfrey. A prince fallen from birth, filled with ambition and a lust for revenge. While Morgott chose to remain faithful to the Golden Order that banished him, and stay in Leyndell to protect the capital during the War of the Shattering, Mog on the other hand, chose to dig even deeper underground, to the lost cities of Noxtella and Nokron, a lost civilization, buried and forgotten by the arrival of the Greater Will, another outer god. From there, Mog would build the Mogwin Dynasty Mausoleum, in the Mother's name, to start a cult based on her accursed blood, and starting his plan to conquer the lands between. And just like that, Mog the Omen became the Lord of Blood. To this end, Mog needed to accumulate victims and collect blood, increasing both his and the Formless Mother's power. Much aware that he wouldn't be able to do so himself, Mog founded an order of elite warriors, tarnished warriors tainted by accursed blood, the strong arms of the Formless Mother. The Bloody Fingers. The Bloody Fingers are tasked to hunt down and kill their fellow tarnished warriors, and collect their blood from their corpses. The first Bloody Finger you are most likely to encounter is the Sanguine Noble known as Neregus, who use a typical weapon of the Bloody Fingers, the Reduvia Dagger. There is also Eleonora, the Dragon Knight, now Violet Bloody Finger, a once proud knight whose legacy has been tainted by her cessblood. But of course, our main point of focus here is yet another Bloody Finger. The old man known as Okina, wielder of the Rivers of Blood. Okina was once a great swordsman from the land of reeds, a distant region far away from the lands between. His nickname came from his wooden mask that depicts an old man baring his teeth. We know that he had several disciples in a group called the White Reeds, combatants who seek proper deaths won honorably through hard-fought combat. As time passed, the more Okina sharpened his mind, the more the absurdities of the world came into stark relief. And so, he chose to renounce it all, and rise to a higher plane. A plane where there was only himself and his katana. This ascension eventually led him to Mog, the Lord of Blood, and, when Mog first felt Okina's sword, and madness, upon his flesh, he had a proposal, to offer Okina the life of a demon, whose thirst would never go unsated. Before long, Okina became a demon of a swordman, a Bloody Finger, working for Mog. When it come to his weapon, the Rivers of Blood, it is a katana which is, as always, described as a cursed blade. But unlike its predecessors of the previous games, the Rivers of Blood doesn't seem to harm its wielder. Or does it? We've seen before how the Chaos Blade harm its user with each swing, how the Chickage harm his user over time when transformed, and how the Mortal Blade of Sekiro can instantly kill anyone trying to use it unless that person happened to be immortal, like Wolf. The Rivers of Blood doesn't do any of that, which is useful for gameplay purposes but could also hint at something else. For starters, it is unlikely that the Rivers was always Okina's sword. He was most likely the wielder of a normal katana until he met Mog. After all, if we read the weapon's description, it clearly states that Mog only felt Okina's madness through it, which sort of imply that the Rivers of Blood was once a normal katana that was corrupted by Mog just like Okina himself. The once proud and respectable weapon became a cursed weapon of mass destruction, just like Okina himself went from an honorable swordman to a raging, bloodlust demon. The point is, while its predecessors all target the body of their users, the Rivers of Blood instead seems to target the mind, a more insidious curse, but one that is just as violent. Instead of the slow decay of Okina's body, the sword provoked the slow erasure of his identity, his mind, his proud human soul. A fate that is all too similar to the curse of Hollowing found in the Dark Souls trilogy, or the Beast Scourge of Bloodborne. Throughout the Souls series, this cursed katana cemented itself as an unavoidable archetype, always coming back game after game. Always trading your health, your life or your identity, for the promise of greater power. This concept isn't too different from the stories surrounding Ma Ramasa, a genius swordsmith who forged a number of supposedly cursed blades, proving that the concept of a cursed sword isn't exactly new in Japanese folklore. These games often take place in hopelessly bleak universes, where one of the biggest tragedies is the decay of grandeur, the corruption of nobility, losing what was once great. But something that is often explored is how exactly it happened, what provoked this decay, this corruption in the first place. More often than not, the answer is sacrifice. These games are filled with characters who sacrificed something in the hope of obtaining another thing. Old King Allant sacrificed his body and his kingdom for power, Gwyn sacrificed the whole world for his regime, Lawrence sacrificed his own life and the lives of hundreds of innocent people for the progress of science, Genichiro sacrificed his humanity for Ashina, and so on. The concept of sacrifice is inherent to the Souls series, and it is represented by this cursed blade, just like the concept of decay of grandeur is associated with the crescent axe. But through this katana, these games ask some questions. What are you willing to lose, for the guarantee that all of your wishes would come true? What is worth losing everything for?